And then most plans that are under 6 months in duration are going to be set up by collections. So loss mitigation plans tend to be 6 to 24 months. Oops. Okay. Oh, hey, what did I do? Okay. Just real quickly, I want to talk about the repayment example because there's a couple, there's 2 or 3 really interesting nuances here. The borrower was past due after making a checking account error and being charged many fees by her bank. We're talking fees to the tune of like $800 or $900 when all was said and done. So whatever happened, and again, this is where you can be really helpful. Well, I'll come back to that. She provided a verbal financial application. We've already talked about it. Joe did a good job talking about the reduction in document requirement. When loss mitigation started, which he alluded to back in the mid-90s, it was like re-underwriting the loan. You had to get 2 bank statements, 2 pay stubs, last 2 years' tax returns, financial analysis, firstborn child. It seemed like it. Okay, it was a lot of detail. Okay, so what you had was an already overwhelmed borrower having to come up with all this documentation. So you had a good amount of borrowers starting the conversation about loss mitigation options, but very few actually completing their application, so to speak, because there was so much documentation to come up with, it just became overwhelming. Now, for the borrowers that did provide all the information, there was a very good success rate for that, for those options. The borrowers didn't redefault on the plans and things like that as much, okay? But what was realized is the fallout between, hey, I'm interested in loss mitigation, and here's the last piece of information you asked for, was huge, okay? So how many workouts fell through the cracks there because the borrower couldn't come up with all that information or just didn't want to or was just overwhelmed. So the decision was kind of slow, but it pretty much evolved to the point that HUD, Fannie Mae, and Freddie Mac, and then the smaller and private investors have followed suit to some degree, have said, let's reduce that to basically a financial analysis, proof of income, but that's even not necessarily some of the time. And then the servicer pulls a credit report to verify that the financial analysis debts are accurate, and that's good enough, okay? The 5 pieces of information I gave you are just kind of to cover the bases just in case you need it so you don't have to keep going back and getting more. But in this case, all that was necessary was a verbal financial application, which tells me this was either an FHA or a Fannie Mae loan. Understand with that change of reduced documentation came another interesting nuance. So you reduce the documentation necessary, so you have more borrowers that are actually in the game. They've provided everything they needed to, but maybe they didn't have to invest a lot to get the work out. Maybe they didn't have to scurry around and find bank statements and find tax returns, et cetera. They just did a verbal financial analysis over the phone, which how accurate, if you're just kind of winging it on the phone, it might not be as accurate as if they would sit down, with one of you and do so face to face. So what has happened in that shift is that now it's to the point that it's easy to get a workout option, but the reality is, we've already talked about what the options are, over 50% of the options redefault. So over 50% of the borrowers that get a repayment plan or a modification or a partial claim will fall behind again. It is over 50% now, okay? So that's kind of the reality of that shift. So some expect that it'll swing back the other way and that more documentation might start to be requested. So hang tight on that. We'll see what happens. We already talked about the fact the borrower received a loss mitigation mailing. We already talked about the fact that she would be in the minority in actually responding to that loss mitigation mailing. But what I want you to note, kind of before we move on from this slide, is that when she came to us, she was 3 payments past due. She had monthly payments of $1,350, and the total past due amount was over $4,000. Okay, how did we go in the first bullet point from having $800 or $900 in bank fees to being $4,000 past due? Okay, is there probably something else going on in this person's situation? Yeah, probably. Was she open and honest about it and gave us all that detail on the phone? No, she wasn't, okay? So the next bullet point, based on financial analysis, a $500 a month surplus allowed approval for a 12-month repayment plan of $1,630. Well, it's going to increase their monthly payment by $300 a month.